When I did that poll on Instagram asking what review I should do next after episode 1 of my fast film reviews, the last thing I was expecting was for you guys to vote 100% for ranking my favorite musicals. In fact, I almost scrapped this video entirely because I was convinced that no one would watch it. But I guess since this is something you guys really want, I'll deliver. I really love musicals. I don't know if you could tell that by my Renaissance video, but I think musical numbers can drive a single point home better than anything else. Plus, they're usually entertaining and fun. So one day I thought, hey, I've never seen people rank every musical they've seen before. So I'm doing that. Kind of. I'm going to rank the first 10 that come to mind because I don't want to sit at my desk for an hour trying to remember them all. Also, none of these will be animated mostly because I've talked about 8 animated musicals on my channel already, and I want everything to be new. 10. The Wizard of Oz. This is probably an unpopular opinion that I should keep to myself, but the beauty of YouTube is that I can say whatever I want. I don't think this musical is even that great. Hear me out, hear me out. The story feels very contrived and it isn't being driven by anything. It's a very simple movie where barely anything happens. I'm actually very on board with that style of movie. Obviously, not every movie has to be driven by story. It can be driven by setting or character or situation. Chocolat is a movie that is a lot more about the atmosphere and the character arcs than an interesting story, and that movie really works. Thing is, I don't actually think the characters or atmosphere or arcs or setting or anything really are that good. The Scarecrow, the Tin Men, and the Lion are cookie cutter characters with barely any distinct personalities. The objective is obviously clear, but sometimes it's on the nose in the most painful way. Obviously, the songs are great, but your job as a director is to make it so that we're entertained when there's not a musical number. In my opinion, the director didn't do that. Now, look, this movie isn't bad, because at least I'm not bored for most of the film, which is more than I can say for Pocahontas. It's just not great. 9. Lion King. I know a lot of people despise these movies simply because they exist, but for me, as long as the movie creates a different experience and doesn't just copy the original, I'm fine with it. On the surface, turning a famously animated movie into live action, where the dialogue, plot, and even cinematography are virtually the same, would be a bad idea. That being said, the movie, at least, has an overall different tone to it. Where the first one had very bright colors in the beginning, transitioning to more dark colors in the end, this movie is a lot more intricately detailed. Its textures make it feel a lot more like you're in Africa, rather than the kidified version of Africa as seen in the animated movie. Don't get me wrong, I think this kidified version is much, much, much better because it fleshes out Simba's character arc, which is the dramatic crux of the story, but I completely understand people who prefer this movie because of its realism. I still don't think it's anywhere near the original, but I definitely don't actively hate its existence either. Basically, just New Hope and Force Awakens again. Number 8, Annie. I've seen a lot of the classic musicals, but this one never really stuck out at me as being better than the rest, like I know it does for some people. When a movie is horrible, I remember it. When a movie is great, I also remember it. But I forgot about this movie a week after I watched it. In fact, the only reason I remembered it today is because my friend just texted me about it when I was writing this script. The songs are not spectacular, but they're not bad either. The Sun Will Come Out is definitely a standout because it's super catchy and it was the only time I felt emotion for the girls. Hard Knocked Life and You're Never Fully Dressed Without a Smile are also catchy, but they don't really add much to the story. Ultimately, the songs are good if you're in a long car ride and you want to listen to some music, but bad in the sense that they're just breaks during the movie that feel like they're only there to fill up some time. I get that a big selling point of this movie is that they're cute, but just cute doesn't cut it for me on this list. There are plenty of incredible musicals that are able to be funny, cute, entertaining, and a thousand other incredible things. So putting this movie above those ones just seems unfair to me. Number 7, Aladdin. This is actually a pretty good adaptation. Disney added a lot of cool things that improved upon the original, like having good CGI during the Cave of Wonders, some really visually original musical numbers, and they even added completely new things like Jasmine being a lot more skeptical of Aladdin than she was, and new locations that are really convincing and do a better job of bringing the audience into Agrabah. Do add me on that. Will Smith is honestly pretty good too. Once I stopped comparing him to Robin Williams, I actually realized that he had an interesting interpretation of the role. Let's be real, Robin Williams was impossible to follow. That being said, there is plenty wrong with this movie. One of the things that makes animation so great is the fact that you can pair anything you want with regular old humans or animals without it looking strange, because they're both animated. But because some things are CGI and some things are real in this movie, whenever something real interacts with something CGI, it starts looking incredibly fake. This is a problem that persists throughout other Disney remakes as well, especially the Beauty and the Beast one. No matter how good the actress or actor is, it never looks real. The other problem with this movie being live action is the energy can never hit the same levels of the original. Will Smith is trying his best, but there's only so much that CGI can do. The ending is another thing that really suffered from this movie being live action. All the dark lighting and the awful Jafar genie effects really didn't work for me. Not to mention that a big portion of it is completely butchered because Jafar doesn't do anything creative once he gets his powers. In the original, he turned into a snake, blew fire, juggled stars, and toyed around with Aladdin like he was a doll. This Jafar just traps people in wind magic and then turns his staff into a snake. It's really inexcusably not creative, and that's mostly because the director didn't want to increase the budget. Number 6, Mamma Mia 2. My grandmother really wanted to see this movie while I was staying with her, so we went to go see it, and I thought it was really good. It's pretty much exclusively tied together with its songs, and when the songs are as memorable as these ones, it's easy to get hooked. The story is quaint, but not really that good. However, I do understand that the movie isn't really about story. The movie is really meant to entertain people, with fun musical numbers and great songs. It knows it doesn't have some grand statement about society. That would have been idiotic and probably ruined the movie for me. Another thing people might enjoy here is, unlike some of the other musicals on this list, the dialogue doesn't play into cute love stories. So people who don't like overly cheesy lines may have a better time than in movies like, say, The Sound of Music. Still, this also explains why it's lower on my personal list, because I love the cheesy dialogue and the romantic dialogue. I guess the best way to put it is this is the kind of movie you watch while screaming Mamma Mia with your friends. Number 5, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. A creative movie that I still think holds up. This one is a lot more about playing with the concept than the music or the story, though. Its setting is very creative, and its songs really add to the wondrous tone it's going for. This is why I think the 2005 remake is fundamentally broken, but we'll talk about that another day. Willy Wonka is another great addition. He plays the role very well and gives a very mysterious yet pleasant vibe, which is a very fine balancing act. The songs are very catchy musically, but they're also a little repetitive and don't add that much most of the time. There's a musical about Veruca Salt who feels more like an obstacle than a character. Her number had nothing to do with Charlie or Willy Wonka or the theme or anything really. That's the real problem I have with this movie. The other children. The characters that are not Willy Wonka and Charlie are not interesting at all. The movie spends a ton of time explaining who they are and focusing on them, only to turn around and say they don't matter. A couple of subplots or something for them to do would have been all I needed. You could make the argument that this movie is not about characters and only about the setting and the world Charlie encompasses, but then why include them in the first place? And why spend so much time on them? Don't get me wrong, the setting and the atmosphere carry this movie. I just don't understand why the other characters needed to be there. Like, at all. Number 4, Mary Poppins. Julie Andrews did a great job, but it's not quite her best role, if you know what I mean. This musical is definitely considered to be one of the most classic, and I think it's easy to see why. Mary Poppins herself is pretty interesting, just on a conceptual level. She's implied to be not quite human, and yet she knows pretty much everyone. She acts like a mother figure, giving the kids advice and medicine and cleaning their rooms. However, she can be quite stern. Basically, she's a mix of the kids' actual parents, not being overly cheery like their mother, but not being as stern as their heart of gold father. Like any good musical, the songs are outstanding. There's so many to choose from, but my favorite is A Comical Poem, because it includes some great foreshadowing and it's such a great tune. By the way, if you don't know which one that is, that's the one that's do 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 as I believe is the technical term. Weirdly though, the songs kind of play second fiddle to the real star of the show, which is watching these four characters just kind of hanging out and doing everyday things with a tiny bit of magic. Saying that out loud, you might think that this is going to be very boring, but boy does this movie know how to keep you entertained. It has a very easygoing tone to it, and I think a lot of people who haven't seen this will be pleasantly surprised. Bringing us into the top 3, we have The Greatest Showman. This one gets a really bad rap, and I don't get why. I knew nothing about P.T. Barnum's actual life before this movie got started, so I have no idea how historically accurate it is, but judging it on its own terms as a movie, I think it's great. Its theme of how success can corrupt you is very interesting, and while it's not handled perfectly, I like how it sticks to that theme even when you think it won't. Barnum starts off very poor but determined, despite being a little over his head. This is presented with good dialogue, his dynamic with his love interest, which, again, not perfect, great songs, and good visual storytelling. The story isn't really focused on one particular idea, which kind of makes the plot hard to follow at times, but it also lets us get to know the characters better, since they'll be important later on. The choreography of the musical numbers are very creative, as well as the cinematography, which is something that no one praises when talking about this movie. The side characters are also entertaining, honestly. Sure, they all serve virtually the same purpose, the theme that it's okay to be different, but some of their subplots are fascinating, mainly Zendaya and Zac Efron's, simply because it dives into personal aspirations versus what other people think of you, and that's a bold move. Plus, I just like racial subplots. I will never understand the people who say this movie is bad, because I really had a great time with it. Number 2, Grease. The opening of this movie still gets me in the feel good, having a fun time mood. It's just such a jam seeing the introduction to characters we'll learn to love. Sure, there are some really, really annoying characters, and its overall message is change yourself for other people, which, kinda questionable there, guys. But it's hard to think of a movie that makes you bob your head to the side and want to dance as much as this one. The story is kind of the dressing to this movie, because the real reason this movie is so well regarded is because of its emotion. Watching this movie, you feel like you're in Danny and Sandra Dee's crew. One great example of how this works wonders is the car chase scene. I didn't think I'd ever be so invested in this little car chase that means practically nothing in the grand scheme of things. Instead of thinking that this car chase is meaningless and stupid, which it is, I'm thinking, win, Danny, win! But why? Why do I care so much about these people? I think it's just because everything is so honest. Of course, the bullies act like this to an outsider. Of course, Danny's different with his friends. Of course, Sandra Dee has to change everything about herself to get Danny's attention back. Not saying it's a good theme, but still, it kind of almost makes sense. Almost. Everything in this movie is brutally honest, so you never feel like you're watching a movie. You feel like you're hanging out with your best friends. So when a car chase happens, you're rooting for Danny because you believe he's a person rather than an actor. No other movie has ever sold me that their characters are actual characters and not actors. When I was in second grade, I listened to my friends Julia and Molly sing favorite things at a talent show that everyone in the grade went to. That was my first encounter with the sound of music, and I wondered for so long why that memory in particular stuck with me. Then I realized that it was because I was hooked. Hooked to the song, hooked to the lyrics, hooked to the message, hooked to everything about it. Since that day, I had heard a couple of their songs like Do Re Mi and their opening, never knowing it was part of a movie. Then my grandmother decided to show me the sound of music, and I was instantly hooked. It took 3 minutes. I'm considering deleting my top 10 favorite movie list because I don't really think a lot of those were accurate, but the place that I gave this movie is still correct. It is my fourth favorite movie of all time. I get that a lot of people are not into sappy, emotional, romantic films, but I love them, and this one is expertly done. There's some great foreshadowing and great twists that I didn't see coming, yet make perfect sense given when this movie takes place. It also has some great, somewhat adult themes about World War II, and some fun, happy go lucky songs for the kids who were too naive to pick up on it, like I was when I first saw it. Much like Endgame, watching this for the first time is an experience I'll never forget. I would say go watch The Sound of Music, but I feel like if you've watched any video on my channel, you know how much I want you guys to see this movie.